I matched with this guy named Aaron in mid-October, and at first he seemed like one of the more normal people I'd met online. His pictures were simple, not overly edited, and his messages came across calm and friendly, without the usual cringy stuff I was used to. We talked for almost a week before he suggested meeting in person. He said he worked late most days and didn't really like crowded places, so he asked if I would want to stop by his workshop where he restored old furniture and did side projects. He explained that the workshop was basically his second home, and that he didn't feel comfortable in loud bars or cafes. At first it sounded unusual, but not alarming. Plenty of people have niche jobs or prefer quiet spaces. I told him I'd think about it, and he didn't push. That was actually what made me agree. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't rushing me. He just let me decide on my own. We planned to meet at 7 on a Friday. He sent the address earlier that afternoon, and when I looked it up, I saw it was right on the edge of an industrial area outside the city. Not exactly romantic, but still not a red flag on its own. I drove there after work, following the GPS past rows of closed shops and warehouses, until I spotted his place, a single old building with a faded green door and a small light above it. There were no other cars around, no people walking by, just the sound of my engine when I parked. I sat in my car for a minute debating if I should text him and cancel, but then I saw the door open, and he stepped outside waving. He looked exactly like his pictures, maybe even better in person, and something about that gave me enough reassurance to get out and walk toward him. He welcomed me inside and held the door for me, and the first thing I noticed when I stepped in was the smell of sawdust mixed with some type of varnish. The workshop was bigger than I expected, with tools hanging on the walls, a few lamps giving off warm light, and half-finished chairs and tables spread across the room. It didn't feel threatening at all in that moment, just messy and lived in. He made small talk while showing me some of his projects. He explained the techniques he used for sanding or staining wood, even demonstrated how one of the machines worked. I nodded along, pretending I understood more than I did. He was actually charming in a low-key way, talking with mild enthusiasm but not over the top. For the first half hour, everything felt normal. I didn't sense anything off about him except that he was a little awkward socially, but that wasn't a crime. After a while, he offered me something to drink and pointed to a small fridge in the corner. I asked for water, and he handed it to me. No pressure to drink anything else, no strange comments. It was around then that the atmosphere slowly started shifting. Not suddenly, not like a moment where something clicked, more like a slow realization creeping in, the kind you only notice when several small things accumulate. He had locked the door behind us when we came in, which didn't seem weird at the time, but the longer I stayed, the more aware I became of it. He didn't mention any reason for locking it. He didn't make a joke about safety or keeping tools secure. He just locked it casually and then continued showing me around. After a little hesitation, I asked him if many people worked in the area at night, and he glanced at me briefly while sanding a piece of wood, then said, "Not really, that most places closed at 6. Something about how he said it made me pay closer attention to the silence. I realized I hadn't heard a single car or footstep since arriving, not even distant traffic. It felt like we were sealed off from the rest of the world, without me noticing until it was already true. He asked if I liked the place, and I said yes, though my voice didn't sound steady to my own ears. He smiled and said he was glad because he didn't bring people here often. When I asked how many people he had shown it to, he paused for a second and said, 2, maybe 3, but didn't look at me when he said it. He kept sanding the wood with long, slow motions while talking like he wasn't really paying attention to his own words. Something about that answer bothered me, but I pushed it aside, trying not to seem paranoid. A few minutes later, he said he wanted to show me something he was working on in the back room. The way he phrased it was normal, but the tone felt different, quieter, almost expectant. He walked toward a door at the back of the shop and waited for me to follow. I hesitated only for a moment, and he noticed because he turned around and asked if everything was all right. I said yes and forced myself to move. The back room was smaller and colder, lit by a single lamp on a workbench. There were old tools scattered around and a couple of broken chairs stacked in the corner. He said he'd been trying to restore a desk he found at an estate sale, but when I looked at the desk, there was nothing wrong with it. At least, nothing visible. Instead of showing me anything real, he just stood there, watching me like he wanted to gauge my reaction to the room itself. I made a comment about the desk, but he didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on me in a way that felt different from the friendly awkwardness he had earlier. It was heavier, more deliberate. I decided then that I didn't want to stay much longer. I told him I needed to get going soon because I had an early morning, hoping he'd take the hint and start walking me toward the exit. He nodded slowly but didn't move. He asked if I was sure I didn't want to stay a little longer. His voice had lowered, like he was trying to sound casual but couldn't quite pull it off. I repeated that I should leave and stepped toward the door. He didn't block me, but he didn't step aside either. He took a moment before following me back into the main workshop. When we reached the main room, I felt a sudden urge to get to the door immediately. I didn't run or act panicked. I just walked quicker than before. He stayed behind me, not close enough to touch me, but close enough that I felt him watching my every move. I reached the door and turned the lock, but it didn't budge. I turned it again, thinking I had twisted it the wrong way, but it stayed stuck. He told me it was old and sometimes jammed, and that he could open it if I stepped aside. His voice was calm, too calm, and something about that stillness scared me more than if he had gotten angry. I stepped away from the door but kept a distance between us. He walked up to it and started fiddling with the lock, but his body was angled enough that I couldn't see what he was actually doing. I didn't hear metal turning. I didn't hear anything at all except my own breathing. After a few seconds, he muttered something about needing both hands, and he placed his phone on the nearby table. When he set it down, the screen lit up, and I saw something that made my pulse spike harder than anything else that night. It wasn't a wallpaper or a text. It was a recording app still open, the timer at nearly 2 hours. It had been recording since before I arrived. I didn't say anything, but he saw me looking because he shifted his position to block the phone from view. He said he forgot to close the app earlier and that he used it to record measurements. His explanation felt thin. Too thin. I forced a smile and said it was fine and that I just really needed to leave. He kept working the lock for another few seconds, and then with a loud click, it suddenly turned. He stepped back and said there it was, acting up again, but working now. He didn't unlock it earlier. I knew that. He unlocked it now only because he saw I had noticed the recording, and maybe he wasn't ready to deal with the consequences of whatever plan he had. The door opened and cold night air rushed inside. I walked out quickly, but tried not to look like I was running. I told him good night and thanked him for showing me around. He didn't reply. He just stood in the doorway watching me walk to my car. I kept my keys tight in my hand and didn't look back once I got behind the wheel. I pulled out of the lot faster than I meant to and didn't relax until I reached a main road with actual traffic. For the next hour, I couldn't stop thinking about the recording. I couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't told him I needed to leave when I did, or if I hadn't noticed the phone on the table. I didn't know if his intentions were violent or something else, but they weren't harmless, that much I knew. I reported the profile that night and blocked his number, but I never heard anything else about him. His workshop address disappeared from the listing a few weeks later, and the place has sat empty since. Sometimes I think about how slowly everything shifted that night, how normal it all felt in the beginning, how easy it was to ignore small things because none of them were alarming on their own. And that's what makes it so unsettling, how danger can slip into a situation little by little until you're right in the center of it, without realizing just how trapped you are until the moment you try to leave. I met Daniel by accident one Friday night. I wasn't out looking for anything, just grabbing a drink with a coworker at a small bar near my apartment. He ended up sitting next to us because there were no open tables, and we started talking after he apologized for squeezing into the space. What I liked immediately was that he didn't try too hard. He joked about the terrible music the bar was playing, asked normal questions, and actually listened. When I finished my drink and stood up to leave, he asked if he could have my number. His voice shook the tiniest bit. That was what convinced me he was genuine. We texted for a week before deciding to meet for an actual date. Just something simple, dinner at a nice but not fancy restaurant on the edge of town. I remember feeling nervous all day, not because I had bad expectations, but because it had been a while since someone made me feel excited in a calm way. When I walked into the restaurant, he was already at the table. He stood up when he saw me, and the way he smiled made it clear he was relieved I actually showed up. Dinner went better than I expected. Conversation never stalled. We joked, talked about our families, our jobs, childhood stories, even our worst cooking disasters. It felt like sitting with someone I'd known for months instead of someone I'd only met once in a bar. By the time the check came, we had already planned a second date without even realizing we were doing it. It just slipped into the conversation naturally. When we walked out into the parking lot, neither of us was rushing to leave. We talked as we walked, still laughing about something he said at the table. Our cars ended up being several rows apart, so we drifted into this slow goodbye stretch where we kept stopping to finish one more part of the conversation. When we finally reached the dividing point between our rows, he pointed at me and said, "Next Saturday? Same time?" I nodded, told him goodnight, and started heading toward my car. I didn't notice anyone around at first. The lot wasn't empty, but most people had already gotten into their cars. Some were pulling out, some talking quietly near the entrance, but nothing unusual. I unlocked my car and grabbed the handle, ready to open it, when I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't running, just steady steps that shouldn't have been that close. Before I could turn, someone spoke. "Don't move." I spun around, and a tall man in a dark hoodie stepped out from behind the truck parked next to mine. His hood was pulled low, and I couldn't see much of his face except his mouth. He didn't yell. He talked low and fast, like he'd done this before. "Give me your purse and your keys." For a second, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I didn't scream because the shock felt too immediate and too close. He was inches from me, blocking my door with one hand slightly raised like he was ready to grab me if I tried anything. His other hand was pressed against his pocket, hinting that he had something there. I tried to speak, but I barely got out. Don't make this difficult," he said. My mind was racing. I glanced sideways, hoping someone was walking by, but the closest person was way across the lot, too far to hear anything. The robber stepped closer, forcing me backward until my hip hit my car door. His voice got sharper. "Give it now." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my purse. I tried to pull it off my shoulder, but the strap got caught in my jacket. He reached out like he was about to grab it himself. And then I heard someone yell my name. Daniel's voice didn't sound like it did at dinner. It was louder, rougher, almost panicked. The robber jerked his head toward the sound, and I saw Daniel sprinting across the lot. He had been far enough away that I hadn't even realized he could still hear me. The robber moved as if he was going to run, but Daniel got to us faster than he expected. He hit the guy from behind with enough force that they both went stumbling. The robber landed on his hands and knees while Daniel stood between us, breathing hard, telling me to stay behind him. The robber tried to get up, but a couple walking out of the restaurant had already seen what was happening and rushed toward us. The man grabbed the robber's arm to stop him from running, and Daniel held on to his other side. The robber kept struggling, twisting his shoulders, trying to break free, but he was outnumbered. Someone yelled that they were calling 911. Another person ran back inside to get help from the restaurant staff. The robber finally stopped fighting, breathing hard through clenched teeth while a small crowd formed around us. I remember just standing there, leaning against my car, trying to steady my breathing. My purse was still hanging from my arm. My keys were still in my hand. Everything that almost happened hit me all at once, and my legs felt weak from how fast everything had escalated. The police arrived within minutes. They cuffed the guy, searched him, and confirmed he'd already been reported earlier that month for similar robberies in the same area. When they asked me what happened, I tried to explain it clearly, but my voice kept shaking. Daniel stayed next to me the whole time, making sure I didn't have to answer anything alone. When the officers took the robber away, one of them told me that getting involved the way Daniel did was risky, but it probably stopped the situation from becoming much worse. They thanked him and then asked if we both needed medical attention. We said no. Once the crowd dispersed and the lot went back to being quiet, it was just me and Daniel standing by my car. He asked if I wanted him to follow me home, just to make sure I got there safely. I nodded, because the idea of driving off alone after what happened didn't feel right. Before I got into my car, he leaned slightly toward me and said, "I'm really glad you're okay." His voice wasn't rough or panicked anymore, just steady. I drove home with him behind me the whole way, his headlights keeping pace like a silent reassurance. When we reached my apartment, he waited outside until I was upstairs and waved before leaving. That night should have ended with a simple goodbye in a parking lot. Instead, it turned into one of the scariest moments of my life. But what sticks with me even more is how he reacted. Not with hesitation, not with confusion, but with instinct to help. And here's the part that surprises people when I tell them this story. That night happened 3 years ago, and Daniel and I are still together. Sometimes we joke that our first real date felt like something out of an action movie. But underneath the jokes, there's this steady understanding that the way we handled that night, the fear, the chaos, the fact that he didn't run away from it, says more about our relationship than anything else. Because even though that night started with a quiet dinner and ended with police lights flashing across a dark parking lot, it ended with something else too. It ended with the person I would eventually build a life with standing beside me, making sure I got home safe. And we've been choosing each other ever since. I met her on a dating app last year, sometime in the early spring when the weather was finally warming up and I was trying to push myself to meet new people. Her name was Mia. Her profile looked normal enough. 3 pictures, all casual, one with her dog, one at a coffee shop, one at a park. Nothing filtered or exaggerated. She messaged me first, which I didn't mind, and she seemed excited in a way that felt flattering at first. Our conversations were easy in the beginning, but she replied fast. Faster than most people. If I answered a message and put my phone down to do something, I'd come back to 3 more messages in a row. Stuff like, "LOL, ignore me if you're busy," followed by, "Just checking in, everything okay?" And then, "You disappeared, haha." She wasn't rude or angry, just attached, like she wanted reassurance constantly. It wasn't a big red flag yet. I figured maybe she'd been through something before and was overthinking. We hadn't even met in person, and I didn't want to judge too quickly. After about a week, we planned our first date at a small Italian place near my apartment. She was already at the restaurant when I arrived, sitting by the window with a nervous smile. In person, she looked exactly like her pictures. Cute, friendly, maybe a little too eager to impress, but nothing off. The date went well enough. She talked a lot, but she also asked about me and actually listened. When we said goodnight outside the restaurant, she hugged me tightly and asked if I'd text her when I got home. I did. Things moved faster after that. She wanted to see me again the next day, and the day after. She'd ask what I was doing every hour or so, and if I didn't answer quickly, she'd send a voice message asking if I was all right. I work long shifts sometimes, so it got overwhelming. I tried to gently slow things down, telling her I liked getting to know her but needed space because of work. She apologized immediately and said she understood, but then followed it with, "I just worry because people always lose interest in me suddenly." That stuck with me a little. Not in a good way. Still, I didn't want to assume the worst. We went on a second date about a week later. Same thing. She hugged me a little too long, looked relieved like she'd been terrified I wouldn't show up. At the end of the night, she grabbed my arm softly and asked, "You'll text me when you get home, right?" I nodded, even though it made me uncomfortable. A few days after that, things shifted. I had plans with friends one night and didn't check my phone for a couple hours. When I finally did, I saw 12 missed texts from Mia. First, a few normal ones, then a couple asking if I was mad, then a voice message saying she felt sick, worrying. I told her everything was fine and that I'd been out. She apologized again and said she just cares too much. I should have ended things there, but I didn't. Part of me felt guilty for thinking she was too much, and part of me was curious. Maybe she'd calm down as she got more comfortable. I was wrong. About 2 weeks after we met, she asked if she could cook dinner for me at my place. I said yes. She came over with a bag of ingredients and practically acted like we'd been dating for months. She put her purse on my counter, opened my fridge to see what I had, and walked around the apartment like she was taking inventory. At one point, she looked at my shoes by the door and asked why I had dirt on them. I laughed it off and said I'd been hiking. She didn't laugh with me. She just asked where, how long, and who I went with. Dinner was good, but the night felt off. Too intimate, too quickly. When she left, she hugged me again, the kind of hug where she wasn't letting go until I did. The next morning is when everything snapped into focus. I got into my car to drive to work, and as I started the engine, I noticed a tiny metal device tucked halfway under the passenger seat. A slim black oval with a magnet on one side. I recognized it instantly, a GPS tracker. The kind you can buy online for $20. My stomach went straight cold. I picked it up and stared at it for a full minute before my brain processed anything. I thought about when she could have put it there. The only time she'd been alone long enough was when she'd gone back to my kitchen to grab a glass of water during dinner. I realized then that she'd walked down the hall too, probably checking every door as she passed. I didn't go to work. I drove straight home, sat in my living room, and tried to breathe normally. I knew I had to confront her, but I didn't want to do it over text. I called her and told her we needed to talk, and she answered on the first ring, sounding thrilled that I called. "Sure, can I come over?" she asked. I told her yes. I had the tracker on the coffee table when she walked in. She saw it immediately, froze in place, eyes locked on it. Not shocked, caught. "What's that?" she asked, her voice small. "You tell me," I said. She stepped closer, staring at the tracker like it might explode. Then she looked at me with this soft, hurt expression, the kind someone uses when they want you to feel guilty instead of them. "I didn't want to freak you out," she said quietly. "I just worry about you. You drive late sometimes, and you don't always answer, and I want you safe." "Mia," I said, trying not to yell, "that's not normal. You hit a tracker in my car." She sat down next to me, too close, touching my arm like she needed physical contact to stay calm. "I'm not crazy," she whispered. "I promise. I've just lost people before. I panic when someone I care about disappears. Please don't be mad. I'm just trying to look out for you." She even tried to smile, this shaky, sweet smile like she expected me to forgive her because she meant well. Something in me snapped right then. Not fear, anger. Real anger. "I'm done," I said. "This is done. You need to leave." Her face changed instantly, not screaming or crying, just blank, like a switch flipped. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and said, "You'll regret pushing good people away." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried something sharp underneath. She walked out without another word. I didn't give her the satisfaction of responding. I blocked her number, blocked her on every app, and checked all my doors twice before going to bed. I kept the tracker in a drawer in case I ever needed proof. She didn't come back. She didn't try to show up at my job or my apartment, at least not that I ever saw. She just vanished from my life as fast as she'd appeared. But every now and then, I think about how quickly it escalated. How easily someone can slip into your life, act sweet, clingy, affectionate, and then cross a line so casually you don't even realize how far they've gone until you're staring at a tracking device under your car seat. And what stayed with me the most wasn't the tracker itself. It was how calm she was when she justified it. Like in her mind, she didn't do anything wrong. Like in some alternate version of reality, she was the one being reasonable, and I was overreacting. That's the part I'll never forget.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing content. Thanks for watching.